On the west coast of Scotland, just 20 minutes south of Oban, you cross an ancient bridge and enter into a different world. The beautiful world of the Slate Islands. In this short film, I'll take you to the 3 permanently inhabited islands of Seil, Luing and Easedale, as well as out into the Firth of Lorn, to see abandoned islands, wildlife and whirlpools.
Welcome to the Slate Islands.
Now, it's often said that these small islands once roofed the world. Sounds crazy, but there is some truth in that. There are buildings all around the world that contain slate that was quarried here from the mid-17th century through to the 1960s. Between 1842 and 1861, the Easdale Slate Quarrying Company shipped in excess of 140 million slates as far away as the USA, Canada and New Zealand. This was dangerous, backbreaking work. This is the village of Elenabech on the Isle of Seil. The village is little changed since its heyday. The workers lived in these cottages that stood just feet from the quarries themselves. The slate was loaded onto the pier, then hoisted by crane onto the waiting boats. The quarries themselves were incredibly deep and were always just one storm away from being flooded. And that is exactly what happened here at Elenabech. In the winter of 1881, a storm surged, pushed through at this point and instantly flooded the quarry. Fortunately, the disaster struck at night, so nobody was killed. But in the morning, 200 men and women had lost their livelihoods. Now, back in the 1960s, after the quarries closed, you could probably have picked up one of the cottages here in Elenabech for next to nothing. Right now, there's one on the market for £150,000. Providing a contrast to the small workers' cottages is An Calla. Now, this was the village distillery, but was converted to an arts and crafts style residence 100 years ago by the owner, Colonel Arthur Murray, along with a magnificent garden that was designed by Thomas Mawson in 1930. It took 6 men a year just to dynamite the bedrock. However, now it's an oasis of calm. Now, there is easy access to Seil across the Atlantic Bridge, but for our next island, we have to leave the car behind and take a small passenger ferry. From Elenabech, it's just a short hop to the second of the inhabited islands, the island of Easdale. During the day, the ferry leaves every 30 minutes for the 3-minute crossing. If you need it out of hours, then ring the bell. This is a lifeline link, so the ferryman of Easdale is one of the most important members of the community. And the weather isn't always as calm as it is today.
Aye, in the winter time we can get some interesting weather, gales, storms, all has an impact on how we operate and what have you. Yeah, it can be challenging.
What happens when there's a medical emergency midnight? What happens then?
Well, if we can do it, we'll call out with the ferry. If it requires a doctor, ambulance crew or police or fire or ambulance, etc. If failing that, it'll be the helicopter. We'll come directly from its nearest, sort of like Glasgow or Edinburgh, I suppose.
Where's your special destination?
Oh God, there's a lot of places. Well, the wee islands are nice, the Belnahua, the Gavlogs. But really my favourite is just straight across there, the Mull Shore. Nice wee bit, nice wee inlet, moor the boat safely, wee waterfall, wee beach, lovely.
There are no cars on Easdale, just a few golf carts. Each house has its own wheelbarrow to bring supplies up from the boat. The fact that there is a functioning community here was not a foregone conclusion. When the quarries closed, most people left, and at the end of the 1950s only 7 elderly residents remained. However, the population now is around 60, and there is a social centre and a cafe pub called the Puffer, which you might have seen on the television. Now, if you watched the BBC Scotland series Designing the Hebrides, then you'll know that this bar was completely refurbished by Banjo Beale. A short walk around the island along the old railway tracks takes you past the flooded quarries. It's a unique landscape that is best viewed from the highest point on the island. From the viewpoint, there's a spectacular view over the island, but if I turn around, then you have all of the islands of the Firth of Lorn. Ling, Scarborough, down to Jura, and in the far distance, Islay and Colonsay. Now, not surprisingly, with the light and the colours and the scenery, this is an island that attracts artists.
I've lived here 3 years, and on a whim, I was just open-minded and set an intention to move, and the universe just basically opened up. And so for me, it's about art and nature and art, because nature was the first port of call. And I walked along the beach 8 years ago when I lived in Blackpool and bumped into the driftwood, and that's what got me back into my art. And so here on this island, people were like, when I first moved here 3 years ago, they were like, well, there's no driftwood. And I was like, yeah, there is, because you manifest what you want. And no one teaches this, you manifest what you want. So I was like visualising like driftwood coming here. And even though it didn't come straight away, it was a year after and it came. And so I was collecting it off. And then everyone's like wanting to collect it off, you know, off the shores here. And it only happened like quite busily the year after, but I still collected quite a bit. And the nature and the art is what helps my mental health. I don't like saying mental health actually, because I feel there's a stigma about it. I like to say rewire and firing your brain to a better, positive state of being. And basically on the island, that's what I do. Be out in nature. Sometimes off the island, it's nice to get off the island and then come back here and create. Collect all the slate from the back island, because the slate, it's not just slate, it's got pyrite in it. So if you know anything about energy and healing, it's fool's gold. It's got fool's gold in it, which is actually quite good for our body. It's good for our emotions.
Now for the third of the inhabited islands. Reaching Ling requires a ferry ride from the village of Cuan Ferry at the southern tip of the island of Seil. In many European countries, the MV Belnahua would have been retired, but here in Argyll, this 1972 vintage ferry just keeps on going, squeezing up to 6 cars on board for the short crossing that leaves every half hour. Slate quarrying was active here until the 1960s, but there are plans afoot to resume quarrying on a non-profit basis to create employment and enable many historic buildings to be re-roofed with authentic slate. Around 200 people live here, and the main settlement is the attractive village of Cullipool. There is no 24-hour shop on Ling, but you will never go hungry. Okay, so we have chutney and shortbread from the Ling Locker. Well, there might not be a sandy beach, but each morning the residents of Cullipool wake up to one of the most inspiring panoramas in the Hebrides. For writer and poet Norman Bissell, the first sight of that view 17 years ago changed his life.
It was so instant that I pulled up the car and I knocked on a door where there was a for sale sign. It was as instant as that, my falling in love with Ling, living on an island, expressing the earth. It's a memoir about growing up in Glasgow as a child, a very happy childhood, and then discovering Ling, and then Ling during lockdown, and the efforts of the community to reverse depopulation. And part of that was done by the raising of funds for the Atlantic Island Centre. which is a community hub as well as a visitor attraction. So and it has a cafe, as you all know, and there's nice lunches. So that was, I was heavily involved in raising the funding for that back in, it opened 10 years ago in 2015, and I was the vice chair of the trust at the time, and it opened, and it's still going strong.
In the southeast corner of Ling, you'll find the gorgeous village of Toberonaki, from where you can look across to the private island of Shuna, which is currently on the market for £5.5 million. When you're here, it's impossible to resist the temptation to get out on the sea amongst the islands of the Firth of Lorn. So that is exactly what we're going to do with local company Seil and our wildlife guide Rachel.
They're an incredibly beautiful place, and they've got a huge amount of wildlife within the islands and the coastal waters around here as well.
What particularly excites you when you go out on a cruise like that? What are you really looking for?
So my background's marine mammal research. So the Slate Islands, they're part of the Firth of Lorn special protected area for harbour porpoise. So it's a really good place to see harbour porpoise, which are one of the more elusive species, but all of the marine mammals I'm particularly looking for when I'm out on the water.
We pull away from Elenabech, past the pier, and follow the west coast of Ling, until arriving at Fladda, from the Old Norse for Flat Island. This is a Stevenson Brothers lighthouse built in 1860 and occupied until 1956, since when it has been automated. Adjacent to Fladda is the old slate quarry island of Belnahua. You can visit the island, but it was abandoned in 1914. Before that, up to 150 quarry workers lived here in extremely harsh conditions. Moving further south, we pass the uninhabited island of Lunga, a haven for wildlife such as feral goats and common seals. 29 people lived here at the end of the 18th century, but there are none here today. Between Lunga and Scarborough, the narrow strait is where you'll find the Grey Dogs tidal race, a particularly violent stretch of water known as the Little Corryvreckan. Next comes mountainous Scarborough. Not technically one of the Slate Islands, but it dominates the view for miles around. There is a breeding pair of white-tailed sea eagles here, and we were lucky enough to see one of the pair enjoying the view across the Grey Dogs. Although it has no permanent inhabitants, you can stay at Kilmorey House on Scarborough. Around £15,000 will buy you a week's accommodation with a chef included. David Beckham celebrated his 50th here along with his 2 sons. The island's small fallow deer population enjoy the isolation all year round at no cost. The strait between Jura and Scarborough is the location of the Corryvreckan whirlpool, the 3rd largest in the world. The strength depends on the tides, and thankfully for us, we pass through during a less violent period. We then turn north and head for home. Back in Elenabech, I asked our skipper if he had the best job in the world.
Yes, it is. It's great. It's fantastic. Yeah, you can't really get much better. So, I mean, I just live over on Easdale, so just out on this nice, flat, calm day. Can't get better, really. It's different every time we do it, basically. So every time we go out, the wildlife's in different places. There's different wildlife, all that sort of stuff. But I just like getting out and showing people the island.
What is it like to actually live here and experience it? What makes it so special, this place?
It's the movement of the water around the islands, because it's always different, shifting with the different lights you get. So September we've had just rainbows almost every day, and then the sunsets and the sunrises on the water really make it a very, very magical place.
Now for some Slate Islands practicalities. For example, where can you buy food? Well, there are 2 provision shops, one in Balvica on the Isle of Seil and the other at Cullipool on the Isle of Luing. For history, visit the heritage centres on Easdale, also in Eleanor Bay, and the Atlantic Island Centre on Luing. And finally, eating out. On Easdale you have the Puffer Bar, in Eleanor Bay you have the Oyster Bar, also on the Isle of Seil, right by the bridge, is Tai and Trish, and then of course, yet again, the Atlantic Island Centre on Luing. Or you can travel 30 minutes up the coast to Oban, where you'll find one of the best seafood restaurants in Scotland, E.E. Usk. They may be the least known of the Hebridean islands, but in terms of scenery, history, geology, wildlife and sunsets, the Slate Islands, they punch well above their weight.